This is the Venturing Angler Podcast. I'm Tim Harden. In this episode, we're chatting with Jorge Trucco of Patagonia Outfitters about fly fishing in Patagonia, guiding, his history in that region, and more. Let's chat with Jorge. All right, we're here with Jorge Trucco of Patagonia Outfitters. Jorge, welcome to the Venturing Angler Podcast.
Hi, Tim. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Right before we hit record, we were talking about a little bit about your history down there. You've been in Patagonia in Argentina for a long time. When did you get started down there?
Well, I actually was born in the city of Buenos Aires, and I spent my childhood in Buenos Aires, went to school and everything. But I was always attracted by fishing, and I didn't know the existence of fly fishing until I discovered it. And the only place where you can, not the only place, but where you can find trout and some salmon in Argentina is down in the Patagonia region, which is far away from Buenos Aires. It's, for instance, northern Patagonia is 1,000 miles southwest from the city of Buenos Aires, and the rest of Patagonia is even further away, 2,000 miles or whatnot, and depending where you want to go. And so I made a point on actually visiting Patagonia, or coming to Patagonia every year. And I was studying business also in economics, and I got a degree, but I really was looking for a good reason to live in Patagonia. And in 1978, I came across the possibility of buying a bread and breakfast place in San Martín de los Andes, and I bought it. And it was sort of a risky decision because nobody would have expected that I, after going to college and all that, would all of a sudden decide to move down to Patagonia, which was a very isolated place. Very few people lived in Patagonia back then. In the town of San Martín, there were 6,000 people. The town of Junín, which is 20 miles away from San Martín, were like 1,000 people. And but I think that was the best decision I've ever made. At the beginning, I didn't mean to become a fishing guide. I didn't know that would happen the way it actually happened. So I had my bread and breakfast place for skiers and for people who would come during the summer to visit and all that. But just like in spontaneous form, people started calling me up. They wanted me to take them fishing. And there were people also from the United States that would call me. They would actually call my mentors, who were Jorge Donovan and Baby Ancherina, who were the two guys who actually brought Joe Brooks down in 1955. Wow. And those were they were much older than me, like at least probably 30 years older than me. I was in my 20s and they were in their 60s or something like that. And they would get calls from people in the United States who wanted to come down fishing, and they would, refer them to me, and I would take them fishing. And that's the way I became a guide. But I didn't know what it took to be a guide, and so I tried, because there were no other guides. There were nothing. Nobody was running any fishing operation. There were no lodges. Nobody floated. So it was, I had to figure it out by myself. Nobody, and the small fraternity that fly fish in Argentina, there were some, but very few. The concept of fly fishing was about catching 10-pounders with streamers and sinking lines. They disregarded dry fly fishing altogether. And that was the way I actually discovered what was of value to the international angler was in 1979 when I visited the United States, and I visited Jackson Hole in Wyoming. And I was friends with AJ DeRosa, who was about my age. He is a professional guide, and Patty Riley. Those were the two first professional guides I've ever met. So I stayed in Jackson Hole for quite some time, and I saw how guiding was being done. And so, what was of value? What people were looking for, and I thought that there was, that with all the rivers that we have down in Patagonia that were totally disregarded because the local people only cared for 10 pounders and up. I could apply all those things that I saw in Wyoming. For instance, fishing the Snake River, floating the rivers, the South Fork, and fishing the Green River in Pinedale, spring creeks like the Fish Creek and Wilson. And so that was an eye opener. So I thought if I can apply all these techniques on our rivers that are totally disregarded, I could, there's limitless opportunity, and that's what I did. And it was, I was successful by doing that. And like a year later, I got a call from the company Frontiers from Susie Fitzgerald herself, and she said she had heard of me and she wanted to start a permanent operation, and that was the beginning of everything. That the operation started growing like crazy, and she asked me, "What do you need?" And I said, "I need vehicles and I need guides," because there were no guides like the guides I saw in Jackson Hole, other than myself. No, so sure enough, we started bringing guides from the United States and including local young men in our team that would learn from the American guides, and that's what I did for 20 years, and that's the way I created a pool of local guides too. And then, like 20 years later, I started a guide association. Now it's like a union, now, like 500 members and stuff like that. But that's the way it started. It was a lot of fun.
I bet. And so this was the late 70s. Is that right?
I started. If somebody asked me when was it that you guided for the first time, and I remember the first time I took somebody fishing, and I guided him was in 1978. I took Phil Miravalle from California, from San Francisco, fishing on the Mageo, and from then on, I started taking people fishing, a lot of times for free. And until I started getting bookings on the phone, that was a different ball game. One thing is taking people fishing for free, and one other thing is somebody booking on the phone, sending a deposit or something like that.
Right.
Because then you have to deliver. It's a totally different ball game. And so I had to go through that by myself, and of course I made like countless trips to the United States, to Wyoming and Montana, and I saw how things were done, how they would float the rivers, how they would fish with. I had never seen anybody fish a hopper and a dropper, for instance, before 1979 when I was when I went to Jackson Hole. So things like that. I mean, that sounds so simple today. We didn't know that, and nobody actually fished dry flies. I mean, some people did, but very, very seldom. They were usually chasing two-digit fish with streamers and sinking lines. And so I found myself with the opportunity of using all these resources and around San Martín de los Andes by myself, and so it was, and that remained that way for a long time before I started seeing competition. Now there's a lot of competition, but that was, I started in 1978. So all through the 80s and part of the 90s, I was almost by myself with my team. It was, and everything we did was the first time it was being done. So everything was sort of foundational. Like at the beginning, I would keep my clients in the town of San Martin, and would drive back and forth to different rivers every day. And then, I would all of a sudden one day I talked with one of the owners of the places by the river and say, look, why don't you let me use your house? Or they either had a house or an office or cabins or whatever it was that we could use, even if it was a basic thing, it didn't matter. But so we could stay here instead of driving back, and that's the way that the lodges were started in San Martin or in the area of northern Patagonia, because I started staying at the places by the rivers, and then the next year we added 2 more bedrooms and 1 bathroom and stuff like that, and on and on and on with several places. I mean, mostly all of the lodges that you have in northern and central Patagonia, especially northern Patagonia, I wasn't involved in the initiation of those lodges in a sort of a spontaneous manner, but that was the way it unfolded and it played out.
Growing up in Buenos Aires and then heading into Patagonia, what made you choose San Martin? Was it the skiing? I guess
there was I think there were the most known town in Patagonia was Bariloche. San Martin was a little town that I thought San Martin had a lot of potential. I mean, there's more rivers around San Martin than there are around Bariloche. And I mean, you can think of 5 or 6 rivers off the top of my head right away, and within 1 hour drive in San Martin, you have like 8 rivers or something like that, different rivers. So from the fly fishing standpoint, hands down, San Martin was a more strategically located destination than Bariloche. Then the other alternative would have been Esquel, that's south of Bariloche. That would be central Patagonia. I had been there, but I still thought that San Martin, the types of rivers that there are, and the type of fishing that I wanted to do, and or the programs I wanted to offer. Back then, I think San Martin was the best choice by far, and I don't think I was mistaken. I think that was the success that lasted, uninterrupted, 30 years or 40 until today. The difference is today there's competition. There's many guys, and it's not like the 80s. The 80s, I mean, it's incredible to think that you could fish rivers like the Mageo or the Chimehuín, and you were the only one on the river, all season. That is incredible, and because today it's impossible. It wouldn't happen. And it was to me was, bringing American guides and becoming friends of them, and then visiting them in the United States and exchanging knowledge with them and all that, and including local guides that learned from them, and all that was that was a lot of fun. I mean, that was an interesting process that I will never forget. It was a lot of fun. And with the American guides, I would go and scout rivers that I hadn't fished before. I mean, in Patagonia. So, and we would, I would go with 3 or 4 other guys, and we were 5 or 6, and exploring the river or scouting, and that we did that all the time to come up with new programs all the time in order to have something new to offer to our agent and to our clients every year, and we did that. And the one thing that I wanted to have when I saw how rivers were fished in the States, they were using back in the 70s rubber rafts and wooden Mackenzie boats. I thought that it would be very difficult for me to bring a wooden Mackenzie boat. I hadn't seen the 70s fiberglass boats. The ones I saw were just wooden, and but I thought that I could get a local manufacturer to make a raft for me, and I went to the two most important ones, and they said no, that they wouldn't do that. People, there's no market for rafts, and they were building like Zodiac type boats. And then I came across a young engineer uh, who was just starting, and I showed him a bunch of photographs that I had from the rafts that I saw in the United States, and I explained to him how, what I wanted, how I wanted the rafts to be, and all that. And he said, "Okay, I'll make them." And that was the first raft that was made in Argentina for fly fishing. It was back in '81, and then in 1990, I was able to contact Greg Tapman, and finally was able to import two Mackenzie boat kits, wooden boats, and that was in 1990. So those were the two first drift boats that we had in our rivers. And but again, it was those were incredible times that I'm glad that I made the decision of moving down to San Martin, because everything was an adventure all the time, every year, every minute.
Yeah. I I've it's been a few years since I've been down there. But if I recall, I got off the plane in San Martin, and then within no time, as I'm driving into town, well, I wasn't driving, but as I was the passenger in a car heading into town, I saw a lot of blue rafts, and I believe those were the rafts that you guys have for all of your operations, correct? Here on that side of town.
Yeah. I don't know when it was that you were down in San Martin. The blue rafts are not were not that you saw were not ours.
Oh,
I'm
I'll
sure
crop out that I'll crop out that section. I can just forget
no,
that
because
one. Sorry.
yeah, no, the blue rafts belong to a former client of mine by the name of Ken Gangwer, who lived in Jackson. He passed away like a few months ago or something like
Oh
that.
wow.
He bought a property that I actually showed him back in the 90s, and he built a lodge, and he started running fishing programs. Mostly they were all float trips, most 100% float trips, and they had those blue rafts. Our rafts were those blue rafts were imported. He was able to import those blue rafts. That's actually a recent situation, like in the last 20 years. But 40 years ago, the only way you could have a raft here was have it made by this guy who made the rafts for me, and then and those rafts were black, and some, then he came up with other rafts that were like orange or red, and those were the only rafts you would see for 20 years, until people started finding it's very difficult to import things into Argentina because of all the regulations and taxes and all that. So importing a boat is very difficult. Now there are drift boats that are made in Argentina by a former guide of mine who I brought from Idaho. He used to guide for Mike Lawson, and he actually in recent years was able to bring a mold and drift boat mold, and using that mold, he started with a partner here in Argentina. He started manufacturing drift boats, and that is one of the sources of drift boats that we have. We bought a lot of those boats, but that's the recent thing, the last 10 years or something like that. Now we tend to actually use drift boats more than rafts. People like them better. They require you can stack up two rafts on one same trailer. Well, you can't do that with a Mackenzie boat or a drift boat. So that takes a more expensive rate, but it's what the market actually has evolved into. So you have to go with the market. And now we're using mainly. I don't think we have any rafts left. But
Oh,
now we
wow.
have mainly drift boats.
San Martin is one of the few places I've traveled internationally as an angler where I thought that my wife would really enjoy the town too. For those who haven't been there, how would you characterize San Martin, the
I
town?
would say that it's the Jackson Hole of Patagonia. It's
Uh,
like a hole, like Jackson Hole is a hole, with the difference that's on a lake, Lake Lacar, which is the only lake and the area that actually flows the other way. I mean, it flows through the mountains into the Pacific, and it's a very it's a very unique town in the country of Argentina. You don't see towns like San Martin. It's all they have a building code that has several rules. So all the houses look like they're like are good looking, and it has a sort of Swiss style that's a result of a building code that they have, and it's very clean, and there's flowers everywhere, and so it's very unique in Argentina. You don't see towns like that in Argentina. And I sort of living there, living here in Santa Martin, I sort of I'm used to seeing it, but when I go to other places in the country, I can feel the difference. It's a very attractive town, and everybody, all our clients and guests, they like to spend a day or having going for lunch or dinner or something like that, or shopping to the town of San Martin. It's very beautiful. It's very attractive, and yeah, of course, it's like it has evolved like in the winter it is a ski destination too. So you have all kinds of shops, fishing shops and skiing shops and clothing shops and stuff like that. It's a very beautiful, and it's surrounded by beautiful sites. I mean, lakes. There's lakes all over. There's rivers all over the place, and and it's surrounded by the national park, and you can see the Lanin volcano in the distance. The national park is named after the volcano. Um, to me, is the nicest town there is in the country of Argentina.
yeah, I haven't been to Bariloche, but I was so impressed with San Martin, and it did feel like I was staying in this old European style hotel. Swiss makes a lot of sense, and great restaurants. Um, I
Yeah.
enjoyed being in the city as much as I enjoyed uh, the fishing, and the fishing was world class.
Hmm. How long ago were you here in San Martin?
It was maybe April of 2019, I think.
Oh, that's 3 years back. Yeah, yeah.
It's not too long ago. It's always too long between before I'm back in Argentina again, I guess.
I don't regret the fact that I decided to live in San Martin. It's something. Then I had married, and I had children and everything who were born in San Martin, and one of them still lives in San Martin. The others don't. But the it's the lifestyle and the fact that you're close to many rivers and you can fish, anytime, and that's a great thing. It's like living in Livingston, I guess, or someplace in Montana or in Jackson Hole, something like that. But I don't regret the fact that I moved to San Martin. That was a great move,
Yeah,
especially the years that I was there, because everything. I mean, there was nothing. There were no hotels. There were hotels in town. Yeah, that we had, but there were no lodges on the river by the rivers, or guides or outfitters, or there were no regulations. I mean, you didn't have to have a license to be a guide. You didn't have to have a license to row a boat on a river. or anything. It was just up to you and your sense of responsibility, and 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 and, and your relationship with the clients, and that was that. It was great for many years. Now it's changed. Now, in order to be a guide, you need to have a license. In order to have a license, you need to be a resident. That was a problem, because that when that happened, when they passed that regulation, that was in year 2000. What they were trying to do, were trying to prevent people like me from bringing guides from foreign countries, because some of the local guides were claiming that they didn't get hired, or they didn't get jobs, because people like me were bringing foreign guides. Of course, those who claimed that were not very good guides, because those who were good guides and were Argentine guides, they were. I mean, they had were working every day. They were guiding every day. They had like 150 days per season, guiding or things like that, and they were locals. It wasn't a matter of being local or not. And the other thing is, if you're bringing guides from the United States, for instance, I started a sister city relationship with Jackson Hole in 1993, and I had our children visit Jackson Hole in 1994. My son went on that trip in our summer and their winter, and so he skied in Snow King and in Jackson Hole and Grand Targhee and all these places around Jackson Hole, and then something happened, and the the relationship fell through. So after Jackson Hole, we started the same thing with Steamboat Springs, and I started, for instance, bringing fishing guides from Steamboat Springs to Patagonia, and what my idea was running some sort of exchange program where our guides could go to Steamboat Springs in our winter and their summer, and vice versa. But the regulations the government passed in 2000, year 2000, required that in order to be a guide, you needed to have a license, and in order to have a license, you needed to be a resident. And then that was an obstacle, because that didn't allow for foreign guides to work as guides in Patagonia, or in the province of Neuquén, actually, any longer. And I disputed that, because it was against the Constitution. I mean, all of our great grandparents and great grandparents in Argentina came from Europe or some place like that, and they were not denied any jobs or work or anything like that. And it is in the Constitution that everybody is free to work and to do whatever is is legal, and it's not against the law. So, and we won that dispute, and the four guides who were coming down in 2000, year 2000, kept coming down the following years. But it was such a an uncomfortable situation that you had to go through to present all these things, to dispute all these regulations every year, that discouraged me and others from bringing guides from the United States, which is a bad thing, because you don't need to bring many guides, but if you bring two or three of the best guides you can have, you keep the high standard of guiding in Patagonia, and you can also run exchange programs, which is good for everybody. For Americans coming down, and for Argentines going up to the United States. I mean, it's so, but that's what that's what it is, and that's the way it is now.
Yeah, and there's so many guides who love, really good guides who love traveling throughout the world, sort of chasing guide seasons, and it always brings great guides to great destinations. Yeah.
Yeah, you can see it on the Panoy River, for instance. You have American guides, English guides, Canadian guides, Argentine guides, Russian guides, everything. But of course, that is a private company, and Russia, I mean, they don't have the same regulations here. When they try to protect, the locals by passing these regulations, well, they always, I mean, it's not a good thing. Because I mean, the exchange of knowledge is always enriching for both parties, and that's the way I see it. And I think that we should be able to bring people, I mean, guides from other places, and we should be able to go to other places to guide. I mean, that's, you know, like for instance, in Chile, there's no problem. I mean, you can be an American and be a guide, like it was in Argentina before year 2000.
Mm. The first time,
And in
oh, sorry.
Argentina too, in Tierra del Fuego, I think, and which is Argentina, Tierra del Fuego, they still bring foreign guides. I think that every different province has its own rules, and
Uh,
the case of our province in Neuquén and the one in Bariloche, which is Rio Negro, have those regulations, but not all of them have the same regulations. So I guess Tierra del Fuego is not like that. Good for them.
you mentioned Jackson Hole several times, and I remember the first time prior to going to San Martin, I asked somebody what San Martin is like, and that's exactly what he said. It's like Jackson Hole in Argentina,
Yeah,
and and that fits. And I'm in
yeah.
Livingston now, and when you mentioned Livingston, it made me think of a question that I often try to figure out on my own, and it's one that I can't explain very well. Last time I was in Argentina, earlier this year, everyone who I was with was from either California, the Jackson area, or the Livingston Bozeman area. That's a long way to
Yeah.
travel for a place. You know, the fishing really parallels, and the the landscapes are very similar between these areas of Wyoming and Montana. Yet people from up here keep coming down there over and over and over again. I can't wait to come back, but I have a hard time explaining why. What is it about Patagonia that is so alluring?
So a mystery place at the end of the world. It's very lightly populated. You see vast territories with no people. It's like, I think to the American people, it reminds um, it reminds them of the West 50 years ago or 80 years ago or something like that. I think it has to do with that, and also the fact that there's opposite seasons helps a lot, because you can come down and fish in December, January, February, March, and but I think Americans would identify with the American West 50 years ago, because that's what I've been told by Americans repeatedly, and I guess that is, and I myself, for instance, I like I like Patagonia because of its loneliness, or solitude, I would say. You ever find solitude without loneliness, like Robert Traver would say, um, and it's still, you don't still a place where you won't see a lot of people around. It's far from the big cities, and it's spectacular because there are volcanoes and glaciers and rock formations and rivers and waterfalls and stuff like that, and flowers and wildlife. And I think that that reminds me of the American West. I've been to the American West several times, and I'm not just I mean, just drove from one place to the other. And driving from one place to the other reminds me of driving in Patagonia from one place to the other. They're all, long distances, and you don't see anybody, and and that, I think, it's very attractive. I think so. I think the answer is, I think Americans relate Patagonia to the American West like 50 years ago. I think that's my opinion.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. There's probably some listeners now who are frustrated with me because I haven't asked about the rivers yet. There are a lot of good rivers around you, and I've been fortunate to
Yeah,
fish some of them. Um, you mentioned the Maggio,
yeah,
which is one I haven't been to. I'd love to, especially to fish under the volcano, not directly under it, but within view. But what are the
yeah.
rivers that you have in your area?
Well, we have the Chimuin, we have the Maggio, the Traful, the Caleufu, the Alumine, the Cojoncura, the Kijen. Let me think. The Limay, and then smaller, I would say, tributaries that are spring creeks like the Malalico, the Filowaum, the Melikina, and I don't know if I'm forgetting some of the Kilkiwe. So I've already mentioned like more than 10. So and those are some of the rivers are good at the beginning of the season, and then they sort of are not so good in mid-season. Some of them are good at the end of the season. Some are good all the time, but depending, depends on the. Some of the rivers have. Some of the rivers are short rivers that have a lake on each end, and so they are lake dependent. Like the Traful is lake dependent, but Traful is a great river, beautiful place to go. I mean, it's a magical. I mean, Ernie Schwiebert called it the river of this in his book Remembrances of Rivers Past. He calls it Traful, the river of the spirits, and it's sort of a magical place. It's so beautiful, and you can get skunked, but you can catch the fish of a lifetime. My largest brown trout, non-sea run. I mean, not Tierra del Fuego, but just in northern Patagonia was came from the Traful River with 16 pounds, and
Wow.
and so that can happen. And other rivers like the Maggio, they have a lake on top, so they are the outlet of Lake Tromen, but it's like the population in the river and the Maggio River is disconnected from the population in the lake. The river, as it comes out of the lake, is a very small piece of water, but then it starts collecting a lot of spring creeks, and it becomes a large spring creek. That's why the Maggio is so prolific, and so in nutrients and food, underwater life, and all that. So you have a resident population of fish that tend to feed on the surface. Of course, you can always nymph fish. Nymphing is always very productive everywhere, especially now that people are they are euro nymphing, which is also a very productive way to fish. Not my favorite, but it's very productive. And and so you have rivers like the Maggio and the Cojoncura that have resident population that are disconnected to lakes, and you have rivers that are more lake dependent, like the Traful and maybe others. But and if when you know all that, you know where to go at different times during the season, how to my 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 criteria when I started bringing people down, it's very much like when I go to the American West. I won't go and fish just the Madison, for instance. I will try to fish everything that is nearby, because I want to make the most of my trip. So I would organize for my guests trips that would include 3 or 4 rivers, so they could go back with a sort of a complete Patagonian experience. So they could go to a small river like the Maggio, which fishes like a spring creek, to a large river like the Cochancura, which you have to float, and you can also fish by wading, but you have to use a boat to cover mileage, and uh, and it's very productive. Likewise, the Alumine and the Chimawin back then in the 80s and 90s, the floating was forbidden on the Chimawin, but now you can. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but it generates more pressure on the river. But the Chimehuin is a great river, anytime. And so there's and then the Alumine, which is the upper section of the Cojancura, and Alumine is formed by 3 or 4 different rivers that flow into the Alumine. It comes, flows from north to south. It's beautiful. It runs through incredible rock formations, and it holds a very interesting fish. And that again, that river again is has its own resident population. So you have all kinds of situations. You have situations where the rivers depend on lakes, and for instance, during our fall, the brown trout are gonna come into the rivers from the lakes to get ready to spawn, and so you start seeing brown trout of sizes that you hadn't seen before, and they are very aggressive because they need to feed, and they need to gain energy to spawn, and so they get careless, and you start catching fish like crazy on dry flies and things like that. That would happen in April, for instance. So depending on the time of the season that you actually will organize trips one way or the other. But there's a lot of options. That's why, actually, when you first asked me why San Martin, well, mainly because of the number of rivers that are close to San Martin that I just mentioned.
Yeah, and it seems like each person has their own favorite, and it's everything offers its own unique experience. And I believe it was the Chimehuin that Joe Brooks first visited, right, way back when.
Joe Brooks was the Chimehuin. Actually, when he first set foot in Argentina, Jorge Donovan and Baby Angelina took him to the Boca of the Quilquihue, which is a smaller river. Today, it's full of houses, and you wouldn't go to the Boca of the Quilquihue to fish, but back then there were no houses, and they had incredible fishing. But then they started taking Joe Brooks to the Boca of the Chimehuin. And of course, you could fish the entire Chimehuin, but what they call the Boca means mouth. What they call the Boca is the first mile that starts from Lake Huechulavquin. And then you fish for 1 mile, and then there's a series of rapids that you have to skip, and if you want to continue fishing downstream. But that first mile is huge, and it has a lot of underwater structure. There's logs and big rocks and stuff like that. And on one side there is sort of like a beach, and on the other side there's a cliff. So if you go up the cliff and you look down, you can spot the fish, and they usually lie on traditional spots. And some people know those spots by heart. And so, back in the 50s, in order to get there, today it's all paved road, but back in the 50s it was all gravel road. And imagine, the type of vehicles they had in the 50s, and it was everything was very, very basic. So getting there was an adventure. And if you got there, you were the only one there. And back in the 50s, the fish at the Boca of the Chimehuin were huge. And so Joe Brooks started catching fish like crazy there, and he actually opened everybody's eyes, because they had never seen a fiberglass rod. They had never seen a fly line the way we know them today. They didn't know how to, the few people who were with him, that there weren't very many people. They didn't know the nail knot, for instance, things like that. And Joe just, they were so astonished when Joe started catching all these fish. And one of the biggest fish he caught it on a popper that you wouldn't even dream of, fishing a popper. And they were all big browns and rainbows, mostly browns, like 15 pounds, everything over, a lot of fish over 10 pounds and up to 18 or 19 pounds. And Baby Angelina caught in 61, caught a 24 pounder. It stood like a world record for a couple of years or something like that. And that was, and then Joe Brooks started writing about that. And that's how it became known. Because the good thing about it, Joe Brooks was a pioneer in the sense that he was actually traveling long distances around the world to go fishing. And that concept didn't exist other than Joe Brooks, and nobody else was doing that back then. And then going back and writing for their magazine, I can't remember which magazine he wrote it for, but and then people would know about the fishing here. And then he also wrote books where he actually mentions the fishing here and all that. And there's also footage because they came with how was his name? Forgetting. I mean, the All American the American sportsman. Who was the? Do you remember the man who was the?
Was it Ted Williams?
No, it was. No, it wasn't Ted Williams. It was. Well, I should remember that. He came down and did 2 or 3 shows with Joe Brooks, and those were shown in the United States, and we still have some of the footage.
Wow, was it for Wild World Sports or something? I think.
Yeah, I will remember his name. I should remember. I mean, never forgot his name. I don't know what's happening with me now.
I feel like I should remember this too, even though I'm up here. I'm gonna Google it like crazy while we're talking. That's interesting. What? Oh, he played for the Orioles. Now I'm learning about Joe Brooks. I didn't know that. I'll try to figure this out because it'll both be eating at us, I think.
Look for. Let me see if I can look up the American Sportsman. Was it the American Sportsman?
The show, was it Wild World of Sports? No, I don't.
I think it was called the American Sportsman, and the guy was a very, very famous guy. Kurt Gowdy.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah.
Kurt Gowdy.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You beat me to it. A question that I don't think I've ever asked anybody in a place like yours where there's so many rivers. Maybe I have, but I don't recall. Do you have a favorite yourself?
Yeah. It's difficult to tell, but I mean, it has to do more with my history. For instance, the Mageo is a river that behaves like a large spring creek. Large, I mean, compared to the smaller spring creeks that I fished in the United States, the Salt Creek and the Flat Creek and the Fish Creek and others, and the West Boulder and the Odell, the Armstrong and the Pews and all those. But the Mageo is a river that flows out of a Lake Tromen, and Lake Tromen is a river that's populated with brook trout and rainbow trout. Now they're starting to have some brown trout too. And the river doesn't have any brook trout. And at the beginning, when it comes out of the Lake Tromen, is a very small piece of water. It's it's not interesting at all to fish. But then, 10 miles downstream, it starts collecting waters from tributaries that are true spring creeks, many of them, and the river starts becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and all that water is spring water. So it holds, and the river is like 40 miles long, and for those 40 miles long, it's totally productive everywhere. It doesn't have any dull sections, and it has different conformations. The upper stretch is like meanders through a meadow section. That was the way Art Lee would describe it. He would call that section the meadow section. And it's all, you can see the fish can see you. You need to match the hatch, and you need to actually make a very, very good presentation, because otherwise you'll spook the fish and all that. But it's demanding and challenging, but it's very rewarding. I love that stretch. And then in the middle, in the mid stretch of the Maggio is what I call the canyon stretch. There's 2 or 3 different canyon sections there with big rock formations and runs and pools and runs and pools and all that. You have to actually walk on big rocks and stuff like that. But it's still very productive too. And then the lower section of the Maggio is like a small chimawin. It's like a freestone that has boulders like of the size. I mean, not big boulders, but it's unlike the upper section, which is all gravel. It has some boulders, and you have to wait. It's easier than the canyon section, but you have a pool, a run, a pool, a run. It's a sort of a classic pool, run, pool, type of river with overhanging willows. And so all of those different, conformations of the river, you are going to find action everywhere. The thing that the Maggio doesn't have, the Maggio is not going to produce a record fish. You're not going to catch a 15-pound fish on the Maggio. I don't know. I mean, we've been fishing the Maggio for many, many years. I guess there was one time that Kathy Beck got, an 8-pounder or a 9-pounder or something like that on a streamer. But the thing on the Maggio is that you're actually matching hatches and you're catching, you're sight fishing a lot of the time. You're spotting fish that are rising, they're feeding, and you're trying to catch them. Sometimes they become very selective. Sometimes they don't, and so it was sort of my discovery, because it was before I understood the value of the Maggio. It was totally overlooked by everybody in Argentina. They didn't actually want to fish it because it wouldn't deliver the 10-pound fish that they were going after. But from the guide standpoint, which was my point of view when I started guiding, it was, I mean, the river where you want to take people to, because it was a guaranteed success, especially in the 80s, in the late 70s and 80s, and also in the 90s. Today, the Maggio is still an excellent river, but I mean, the conditions are the same. It's very prolific and all that. The thing is that now it has a lot of pressure, unlike the 80s and 90s. The 80s and 90s, I was the only one who was bringing people to fish, and the locals disregarded the Maggio, so it was great. I mean, you were there by yourself. And I would say that the same thing happened with the Cojuncura, which is the opposite thing. It's a huge river that has, a lot of fish. I mean, it has a lot of food, and it's the size of I would say, the Snake River, but it's not as fast as the Snake River. It's sort of slower, and the type of fishing is very similar to what you do on the Snake River, for instance. And but back then, if you would compare, I mean, I was fishing the one fly contest in Jackson Hole. I started fishing it in 1993. The last time I was there was 2008, so it was like 16 years in a row. I always thought, well, if we did the one fly on the Cojuncura, we would score 3 times as much as we scored on the Snake River or something like that. Well, that was just because the Snake River was actually having much higher fishing pressure than the Cojuncura did, but I enjoyed the Snake River too. But so those rivers that I actually, this is quote unquote, discovered as fisheries, like the Cojuncura and the Maggio, that were not being fished by anybody, to me are very dear to my my feelings, because I put them. I think that I put them on the map somehow. The Chimawin was already famous because Joe Brooks had made it famous, and because he fished the Boca all the time, but he also fished other places that also delivered big fish. The Chimawin is a river that has it's larger than the Maggio, smaller than the Cojuncura, but it's big enough that you can float, and it has both resident population, and it also has migratory population too. Both things. So you're going to find different things. I mean, if you fish in the middle of the season, like in February, you're not gonna see the lake fish coming from Lake Huachulafken as much as you will in April. But so you have both situations. But the Chimawin was already famous, and Joe Brooks also made famous the Traful because the Traful holds Atlantic salmon, landlocked Atlantic salmon, and back then you would catch some nice 12 pound or 10 pound, 15 pound salmon, and that was an attraction too. So he made that. He and Ernie Schwiebert made that river famous. But nobody talked about the Mazeo and the Cozancura, and I think I like Mazeo because of that. But today, that's because it has to do with my part of my story, because nobody was paying attention to the Mazeo, and I did. But today, I mean, all the rivers that I mentioned before can deliver outstanding fishing, and so I love them all.
I need to get back to fish the Mageo. I did fish the Kojankura, and it was unbelievable. Fish after fish after fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned Kathy Beck. It's funny, I was on a plane into Patagonia in March, and she sat next to me, and then on my way out, she sat next to me. I imagine over the years you've had a lot of notable figures fish with you all down there, whether it's someone like Barry and Kathy Beck or others. Are there any such memories that stand out in particular?
Well, many. I mean, all kinds of memories. Like I was the only game in town, so
Right.
it was. I was lucky to be the only game in town. So so they anybody who wanted to come down was had to put up with me. There was nobody else. And but I really uh, uh, really have great memories of fishing with very interesting people. Well, Lefty, I took Lefty Cray fishing all the rivers of northern Patagonia. Art Lee came down for several years, so I could fish with him and guide him and all that. I saw how he fished. But then other people, like, at one point in 1990, we started doing, we started doing uh, some TV shows with John Barrett, who had a show called Fly Fishing the World, and it aired Saturday mornings on ESPN2, I guess. And the program consisted in bringing some celebrity, like I would say Michael Keaton or Liam Neeson or Robert Duvall or people, or sometimes it was Dick Vermeil, the football coach, and people like that, and we would take them fishing. So that we did like 18 shows of that with Fly Fishing the World. So I got to know famous people because they came for the show. But then I guided Lee Perkins when he was developing the Orvis company, and
Wow.
he would tell me what he was doing and his plans and all that. I remember he told me the whole story when he got the Orvis company. I mean, the Orvis, when it was just a rod manufacturing company and nothing else, to what it is today. And I guided him like 6 or 7 years in a row, and then I guided. Uh, I forget now, but I remember I guided um, Paul Volcker when he was the chairman of the Federal Reserve. He came down to fix the economy in Argentina with the President Alfonsín in 1985.
Huh.
But I mean, that was an impossible goal to fix the Argentine economy. That didn't happen, and it never will, I guess. But took him fishing. I mean, that was a funny thing because he was a dedicated Paul Volcker was a dedicated fly fisherman. He knew everything about fly fishing. You know, he had his own rod and everything else. And he showed up with the American ambassador, who I didn't know. You know, and the ambassador was not a fisherman. And that year, '85, I took him to the Mageo. I took him to the Chimawin, and I took him also to the Mageo. And that year, '85, was the year that I was able to get catch and release regulations for the Mageo. It was the first catch and release regulations in Argentina, first time. And so it was, and I was responsible for that. And because I was the one who actually lobbied and worked hard to get catch and release regulations for the Upper Mageo, because I thought that if I was able to get catch and release regulations for a piece of a river, it was a matter of time before the rest would become contagious, and the rest of the rivers would also become catch and release, which is what happened. But that year, '85, one day we decided to go to the Upper Mageo, which was a catch and release, and all of a sudden the American ambassador shows up with an empty cooler, and I asked him, and there was a lot of people because I mean the people from the embassy, American embassy, people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Argentina, there were bodyguards, medical doctors. I mean, it was a mess. So Mr. Volcker was not very comfortable with all these people, and so I asked the American ambassador, what is that cooler for? And he says, well, we want to take some fish back and offer them to President Alfonsín, the president of Argentina. I said, look, you know, we're going to a river that's all catch and release. And so he tried to push it, and he said, well, can we make an exception? And I said, well, I'm not going to. No, I said, we can. If you are going to take fish back, I'm not. You know, you need to get yourself a different guide. I said something like that. I can't remember exactly what those words or something to that effect. And immediately Paul Volcker interrupted, saying, "Come on, hold it, put the cooler away and let's go fishing." And he just told the ambassador to put the cooler away and let's go fishing. And so that was I never forget that, because I was between a rock and a hard place. And then during lunch, Paul Volcker was having lunch with me, and we were in the middle of we were on the Mageo fishing, and he asks me, he tells me that he's sick and tired of having all these medical doctors and bodyguards and people from the embassy and all that around him when he was fishing. He asked me if I knew of a back road or something that we could take to go to some isolated spot, and so nobody would be with us. And I said yes. And he said, well, just let's pretend you're going to the bathroom, and just we meet at the truck. And so I kidnapped Paul Volcker and took him to a tributary to the Mageo River. It's called the Guacamamuil, which is a small spring creek. In December, it's full of big fish, browns and rainbows. So we spent the entire afternoon fishing that spot, that river, that tributary. And when we got back, they were all upset because he had disappeared, and they know. I mean, imagine that today. There would be drones, and I mean, it would be.
That's great.
And so that he did have a great afternoon of fishing because of that, but nobody would dream of doing something like that today.
No. That's great. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say your concern and actions taken with respect to protecting fish and waters aren't just isolated to that event. You have a history of that. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, the fight for catch and release was an ongoing thing until in year 2000 everything became catch and release. Now it's culture. I mean, I mean, there was a paradigm shift. I mean, now it's the norm, and all the guides are, because now after I created the guide association, the guides understood immediately that that their jobs depended on having very good fishing, and the very good fishing depended on not killing the fish. And so the guides were the first allies when we started having guides down in Patagonia. And the other thing was the battle that we had to stop several dam projects on the Cojancura, the Aluminé, and the Chimewin, and the Mageo, and the Caleufu. That was an incredible feat, because at the beginning it seemed that it was an impossible thing to accomplish, but then the way things unfolded, with a lot of coincidences and accidents in the middle, we ended up stopping the dams from being built. And that was an incredible thing, because if you look back today, that would also look like impossible. Back then it looked impossible, but there were some details that I can explain. It's not a short story, that actually helped to stop the dams. The main thing was that the dams were actually built by the federal government, and the government of the province of Neuquén, where San Martín is is from a different political party that actually opposes the federal government. So the politicians in Neuquén, I was able to convince them to back me, and since the rivers that were supposed to be dammed fell into provincial jurisdiction, the governor of the province of Neuquén had the political right to stop the dams. And that's what we actually accomplished by actually creating a big movement, and convincing all the people, and the politicians sort of felt that backing the people would give them more votes than not backing the people. I don't know that we could do that today, but that's the way we did it in the 80s. What happened is that once I moved to San Martin, and I was there enjoying the fact that I was fishing every day and taking people fishing and all that, I found out that I visited the tourism office in the town of San Martin, and I saw some pamphlets and some booklets that had map drawings with that showed where they were planning to build dams. And I didn't know what that meant, because nobody actually took responsibility for publishing that. But I took them home, all of them, and I started studying them, and I understood that those were dam projects. And then I started investigating, and it was very difficult to investigate because these people who are building dams don't release any information, and because they know that they're going to get opposition. They don't want opposition. And there's a lot of things I didn't know back then, because they have the rhetoric saying that the dam, I mean, hydroelectric power is better than, I don't know, the other type of powers and all that. They tell you a nice story. They had because they know they will need that story, because they need a rhetoric. And at the beginning, for instance, the most difficult project that we encountered was the dam on the Cojancura River, because that dam was part of a complex of three dams, two of which were undergoing construction already on the Limay River. So stopping the Cojancura Dam was impossible, but we did stop it. And in the middle, we started creating, awareness by, for instance, the opening day fishing seasons, we would block the road. We would pretend that we blocked the road. We stop the traffic and give them pamphlets and explain to them what we're fighting for. And they were all fishermen who were driving in, so they liked it actually. And and because of all that, I got an invitation from Mark Dubois, who was also a dam fighter in the United States. I don't know how I mean, because I asked him, "How did you hear about me?" Well, because of your good job. That was the answer. I don't know what he meant, but I got a letter from him inviting me to a symposium in San Francisco in 1988 that was about the problems that the large dams did on many countries in many countries in the world, including the United States and but many other countries in Asia. I mean, China and Africa and South America and all that. So I did go in June of '88 to the symposium, and I met Mark Dubois, and that's where I learned the reason why the dams were built that were totally different from what you were told and what I thought. Because before that symposium, we didn't have the right arguments to actually convince people to stop, that we had to stop the dams. But in that symposium, I learned a lot of things that I brought down, and we started a movement, and we stopped the dams. We got the backing from the support from the local mayors of the towns that are related to the rivers, and then from the governor, and then the governor passed a decree and stopped the dams, and that was it. It took several years, and it was incredible, but we were able to stop the dams, and that's something that I think, because if the dams would have been built, there wouldn't be right now any piece of moving water. It would be a string of reservoirs like they like to do. I mean, when you have an entity like we had here called, it was an entity that was run by the federal government called, a company called Hydronor, um, that actually builds dams. They are not going to build one dam and then cease to exist. They're there, they're already organized, and they are going to look in the map like they're going to go scouting and look for other spots to build more dams, whether they need them or not. And they already have all the rhetoric and all that, that they know what they have to say and what they have to tell people and all that. The same thing happens. I learned that in the United States with the Army Corps of Engineers. They have built a lot of dams on many rivers. Uh, I remember I had a movie that was, I think, published by Trout Unlimited called Dammed Forever, that was about the dams on the Columbia River. And so that was, I saw that movie back then, and I sort of learned that the problem was the same thing. And once you have an entity that builds dams, they're gonna keep building dams until there's no more places to build dams. But they're gonna use all the places that are, you know, likely to build dams. They're gonna use them and go ahead and use them. So we had to stop that, and we stopped that. And that, I think, that is probably the major, the largest or the most important accomplishment that we've had, regarding the fishing and the rivers in northern Patagonia, because now we have the rivers, and otherwise we wouldn't have them. And so that's something to me that was very important. I was very surprised that we were successful. Very surprised, because in order to know what they were doing, we needed to have information from insiders. We had to have inside information about the projects that they were planning to build, and we did have the information. We had people inside that would provide us with the information, with the latest information all the time. And in order to accomplish that, it wasn't easy either. I mean, we had to do our homework to get to that stage of getting immediate information from inside. And so we knew exactly all the details of the different dams, which projects they were favoring first and second and third and all that, and and that that and then the reaction from the mayors of the different towns, San Martín, Junín, and other towns also, was what I ended up, making the difference. And that was a great thing. That was one of the great things that happened.
That's an enormous accomplishment, especially then too, when there wasn't as much awareness globally and knowledge about the negative impact on dams. That's quite the feat.
Well, yes, and I actually based my. There were two books, and I can't remember the. I mean, yeah, I remember I met Marc Dubois, who actually founded International Rivers Network. He's from San Francisco, or California, or I don't know. He's still living in San Francisco. But the other person that was also influential was Patricia Adams from Probe International. She had written a book called "In the Name of Progress." And those were the two sources of inspiration that I had. The other book was the environmental and what was it? The environmental and social effects of large dams. Can't remember the name of the authors. That was a fat book, a thick book, with all the details of that you need to know. That was a complete book that tells you exactly why they're building dams, what rhetoric they're using, what things they are not saying, and all the things that they are not saying. And I don't have it right here with me, but that is a very enlightening book, and I still have it. And the other one was The Name of Progress. That was not just about dams, but was about other things too. But it was sort of the same phenomenon. And once you understand the basics of why those things happen and when you create an entity that is supposed to build dams, for instance, they will keep building dams until there's no tomorrow. There's no many more dams to build. They're going to exhaust all the likely looking places where they can build the dams, regardless of. They don't care about the fishing. They don't care about. You have to imagine too that when you build a dam, it's not just a river that you're killing. You're killing the entire valley.
Yeah.
You're flooding an entire valley, and you can see that in Patagonia, where the dams that have been already built, what they actually generate. Valleys that have hundreds of miles of valleys totally flooded. And when you live in a place like Patagonia, you will see that all the production of any sort, agricultural or industrial or whatever, or even urban and everything, takes place in valleys. It doesn't take place on top of the mountains or on the plateaus or on things like that. It takes place in the valley. So if you're killing a river, you're also killing a valley. So while it's not being said, it's the most important thing, because they're going to say certain things, but what they are not saying is what they are actually doing away with, or what they are actually killing by doing what they are doing. And of course, then you encounter the thing. How do you fight this? Because a politician, you can explain to him, and that's my experience here in Argentina, that that it's not. The inconvenience of building a dam, but the only thing that he will care for is is his votes. And if by stopping a dam he gets more votes, he will probably help. If it doesn't matter, like for instance, now they have two projects on the Santa Cruz River down south, not in Tierra del Fuego, but almost, where you have a run of steelhead, of Atlantic steelhead. It's incredible. And now you have also a run of Chinook salmon. And they have the federal government has has had an agreement with China and about on building two gigantic dams on this river, and they are being financed or funded by the Chinese government. So that is impossible to stop, because now the people in that province are not raising hell or not up in arms or anything. So nobody's going to stop that. And the Chinese people funding the thing, that they're going to push it until it's done. I tried to intervene, but it was, that's today it's not the same as in the 80s. I don't live there either, so I don't know. But that's a story about the dams, and we were lucky that they were successful.
Yeah, that's outstanding. And yeah, you're right. I saw a showing of the film Damnation, and one of the producers, Matt Stoker, said the word dam comes from condemn, and you're condemning a river. And with that, you're condemning everything in that ecosystem too.
Exactly.
And it's a great way, I think, of thinking about that word dam. Well, fly anglers, and so I always have to ask. Plus, I'm curious myself because I'm one of them. We love gear. You named a bunch of different rivers, a variety of fish sizes, ways to fish, walk wade, spring creek, float, big tailwaters, freestones. If an angler's coming down to fish, what gear would you recommend?
And all around, I mean, I think that if you want to bring two rods, a 5 and a 6 would cover every situation. If you're restricted to just one rod, a 6-weight, I mean, I can use a 6-weight on and everything, because sometimes you will want to fish a 200 grain head, like a Teeny 200 or equivalent Orvis or Rio lines, and that you can fish that with a 6-weight too. And you can fish, and you can dry fly fish with a 6-weight. Even on the smaller rivers on the Mageo. You can, if you're careful, you can dry fly fish. So a 6-weight would be for me, I think it would be the most versatile to fish from the Cojuncura to the Mageo. A 5-weight is almost it would probably be more adequate for fishing the Mageo because it's a small river. But if you want to throw a sinking line, it's a little bit too light. And if you're going to fish the Cojuncura and the Chimawin or even the Aluminé, the 6-weight would be probably better. I think if you're going to bring just one rod, I would bring a 6-weight, and I would bring a floating line and another reel or an extra spool with a sinking line. If you care for that, because sometimes there's places where you want to fish a streamer, and you want to catch a bigger fish for the camera. That's what Barry and Kathy Begg used to do. I mean, they are still coming down with me, and they fish dries all the time. But there's always one of them or some of, if I'm with them, it could be me, fishing either with a sinking line or just with a floating line, fishing a super bugger, which is a fly that was invented by Kathy Beck, which is very effective because that's the fly they catch big fish with. And as sooner or later, they're going to catch, I don't know, a 6 or 7 pound brown somewhere. And then you're going to see the fish, pictures of Kathy Beck holding brown trout on the Mageo, on the Chimawin, on the Cojuncura, on the Traful, and all that.
Right.
And they're all, in 90% of the cases, those fish are caught like that. And if you're fishing the Cojuncura or the Chimawin, you probably will want a sinking line. You're fishing the Mageo, no. With a floating line, you can fish streamers without any problem. But I would say 5 or 6 is just one rod at 6. If two rods, 5 and 6, or 4 and 6, something like that. You cover every situation.
And then is a lot of the fishing, dry droppers and streamers. What about fly
Of
recommendations?
course,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I
Well,
like
the
to.
guys are so the guys have their own patterns, and they yeah they are great. They of course we actually recommend for people to bring some basic assortment of flies, and then if they need a special fly, for instance, there's a yellow mayfly that hatches in December and January on the Chimaween and some other rivers, especially on the Chimaween. I mean, we would call them hexagenias 20 years ago, but they are not. They are of the size of a hexagenia, but they are very yellow, bright yellow, and they are native to they're indigenous to Patagonia, and they are actually their name is Kilo Porter, and 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 the hatch is usually at dusk, and it lasts 20 minutes or something like that. So you need to be prepared for that. And fish go crazy when they start because they're such a big fly, um, and they go crazy. And it's a lot of fun to fish that when to fish that fly at the right time. And there's other things too. For instance, in January and February on the Luminaire River, there's worms that fall off the willows, the green worms that fall off the willows on the water, and the fish know it, and they're waiting underneath the willow and attacking those worms as they hit the water. So you can fish that too, and it's very spectacular. And and for instance, uh, in the late season, um, in 1993, they built a dam on the Limay River that flooded the Cojancura, the lower Cojancura. That was really a terrible thing that happened. But it also generated a proliferation of minnows that are, indigenous fish, small fish, that we didn't think that they we I thought they were extinct, but for some reason they started proliferating again, and so you have the minnow run in the lower on the lower Cozancura in March and usually in March and April, and and that's the fish go crazy, on these minnows. They chase them everywhere. They herd them against the bank, and you can see all kinds of strange things. So you're fishing minnow patterns, and fish are some of the fish are really they are very well fed, and they are very strong. They're feeding on those minnows. So that's another one of the features that you have, or different features during the season. And that's why if a 6 weight there is and a 200 grain sinking head is a good thing to have. And so that's why I have all kinds of I have from 3 weights to 10 weights, but I usually fish 5 or 6, and that's it in Patagonia where I live.
I've found the 6 weight is more and more a go-to, especially in this area of the Rockies. And I mean, I fish in Argentina, it seems now, as much as possible. I can't wait to get back. And this conversation is one that just has me eager. And I know the season's just about starting now. So maybe you'll see me sitting on your front porch tomorrow morning. I guess it would take a little longer to get there, but it's quite the place. This has been an outstanding conversation. I've really appreciated talking to you, especially having heard your name for so many years. For those who want to learn more about the fishing down there and your operation and your history and so forth, where should folks look?
Well, I have a website called Patagonia, www.patagonia-outfitters.com. You can you can find me there.
And then of course on social media as well. I encourage folks to.
Yeah. So sorry. Yes.
No, yeah.
Well, social media, we have an Instagram. We have a Patagonia Outfitters uh, page. What is it? The page? No, and site or profile, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we also on Facebook we also have a page, and I have a page too. I have a Facebook account too myself, fishing account. But I don't use it. I used to use it more a few years ago, but not, I don't use it so much. Yeah, we're on Instagram and on Facebook and on LinkedIn, and and we have our website.
Well, I encourage folks to check you out and learn more. And this has been an outstanding conversation. I really appreciate it. And, hopefully we can chat again soon, maybe down there.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be absolutely fantastic. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks so much, Jorge.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's a real pleasure. Thank you, Tim.